Welcome everyone to Unit 3, Compliance. You'll find as you progress through your security career that compliance is one of the most important aspects of your job. I spent in my career as a CISO much of my time trying to understand what the security regulations are that controlled our industry, as well as to determine whether or not we were compliant with those regulations. It's really important that you understand what regulations apply to your industry. Some of those regulations are very broadly defined and some are very narrowly defined. You need to establish a compliance program itself and determine if you are compliant. And if you're not compliant, what do you need to do to become compliant? And what happens if you fall out of compliance? In order to control the compliance process and program, many companies hire a chief compliance officer. And that officer works with the security teams as well as the legal team to understand what are the compliance obligations of the company. So what are the compliance obligations that you're required in your industry? Well, if you're part of the critical infrastructure, these may very well be defined for you. The critical infrastructure are those industries, utilities, and agencies that are highly critical to the national infrastructure and the national security. So what kind of industries are these? We'll look at several in the unit: financial industry, payments industry, electrical utilities, and healthcare. Each of these industries provide critical services to the nation, and we'll examine those. By the way, there's a process called information sharing, and you'll find as you go through your compliance and security program builds that you'll be able to share information with other people in your industry if you become part of the information sharing program. And this may be through an ISAC, an ISAO, or through an informal group. The information sharing program was a concept that was issued in Presidential Decision Directive 63 under President Clinton in 1998. I'll put the context of PDD 63 in the supplemental reading, so you'll have a chance to be able to read through the program. And it's been refined over the years. It's the PDD 63 defined the concept of information sharing and analysis centers, or ISACs. And this was an opportunity for public and private industries and agencies to be able to share security events, incidents, and data. The goal was fast reaction to serious security events. It defined what the critical infrastructure were and what those industries that comprise the critical infrastructure are. It defined the roles of government agencies in working with private industry. There was a saying by Benjamin Franklin, or attributed to Benjamin Franklin, and quite frankly, historians don't know if this ever happened. But he said, at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, we must all hang together, or most assuredly we will all hang separately. Whether he said it or not isn't as important as the fact that coming together to share security information is an important aspect of being able to gather information about security events and security practices that can help you in your compliance programs as well as your security programs. Compliance regulations are developed by statute, agencies, administrative bodies, state law, and special interest groups. They evolve over time to meet evolving threats. For instance, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, the PCI DSS, was developed through the PCI Security Council, which is a combination of credit card company representatives as well as industry representatives who come together to determine what new threats are facing the payments industry. And they modify the standard periodically. As I said earlier, we can have broadly defined compliance regulations or narrowly defined rules. The broadly defined rules generally provide little specificity. An example we'll see is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission cybersecurity regulations. Narrowly defined rules provide more details of the cybersecurity programs. Some regulations provide latitude for how the Chief Information Security Officer, or the CISO, or Chief Compliance Officer meets provisions of the compliance regulations. For example, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act has certain goals and certain activities it expects to be accomplished, but allows the CISO or the CCO to have the latitude to determine how those are implemented. Same thing with the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA. They expect reasonable and appropriate implementations. Almost uniformly, all compliance regulations have two common provisions. You must establish an information security program, and in most cases this must be written, and you must have an individual who develops and directs the program. So how do we construct a compliance program? Well, you choose a framework first, just like you do in the security frameworks that you would use to guide the security of your company. You choose a framework. This could be a regulation that you're subject to, or an industry standard that you're subject to, or both. Determine commonalities across security and compliance programs, and then identify similar security controls that are across both programs. For instance, if I have to have firewalls and firewall rule sets in both my compliance obligation as well as my security framework, that's a common goal and a common element of the programs. You identify those program elements that are different as well. And then you build a matrix of common authority. And that matrix of common authority, basically, if you can envision this, is simply across the top the different compliance obligations you have, and across the side the various elements that have to be accomplished. Again, like a firewall rule has to be implemented, or you have to have security awareness training for your employees. And then you can just check which of the various compliance rules and regulations would have that particular program element. And then you could use that to be able to develop your gap analysis when you're trying to find those things which you have to accomplish in both security and compliance. You know that because you can see that element in the in your compliance, or in your matrix of common authority. And then where you have elements that are unique to a particular regulation, those stand out as well. But how do we construct a compliance program? We establish controls to ensure the program components remain in effect. Controls should be designed to clearly identify the program components. It should be observable and measurable. Now, that doesn't mean it's measured in terms of seconds or number of logs or weight. It's measurable in the sense that you can see it and determine, is it operational or is it not? You have defined time frames, define personnel responsibilities for each control, define documentation, procedures, and mitigation runbooks so that if something does happen, you know how to mitigate the issues. And you have periodic testing of your controls. The most important aspect of the compliance program is staying in compliance. You have to update controls for updates in security and compliance frameworks, and it's critical to run vulnerability and penetration testing on a regular and periodic basis and document everything. And if there's one key and most important lesson I can teach you, it's that compliance is not security. Many companies get compromised who only met the compliance obligations and did not look at security from a holistic point of view.